wanted to do today. Oh no. Oh, and I didn't build the next link out. So I apologize. Under today's class, there should be a new link, and it hasn't gotten there yet. Okay, so it's the presentation is sitting there. Eventually it'll show up, but you can find it under that title right now. Okay, so here's where I want to talk about at a more generic than practical level, those 5 words: linking, listing, tagging, templating, and transcluding. And just to give you an idea, this set of practices, we'll talk about what a practice is, right? So the set of practices I suggest is consistent across all hypertextual writing. So anytime you're writing hypertextually, which in my mind means you're writing something, but you intend it to be hypertextual. So you're imagining it. And so it can be any kinds of texts. I think when you wrote standard research papers with footnotes, you were writing hypertextually because you were imagining you put a footnote in and that your author's attention would be maybe drawn to that footnote in certain circumstances. So you're not writing purely sequentially. Okay, so when you're writing hypertextually, you have in your mind these ideas of links and tags, and now you'll have these ideas of transclusions and lists and templates. So we'll talk about that, and then I'll show you how to engage in those practices with specific techniques that work in TiddlyWiki. And you can use another program like Google Docs to engage in these techniques of linking and listing, right? You can make links in Gmail. You can actually you can do all of these things in all of these different platforms. So I show you these practices, and then I show you the techniques to use a particular platform. And then the reason that I use TiddlyWiki is because it's kind of easy to get to all of those techniques pretty quickly. But I want you to be thinking a little bit about how you would use these techniques if you were using Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Okay. So this is what happens when you do stuff really late, is now I have to find my linking. There we go. I forgot to write that one out. So I'm just going to walk through them by hand, okay? So linking, if you think about it and look at the way that I phrased it here, linking is the technique in creating an opportunity to move within a text or to another text. So there's no code there. Okay, so when you're writing a link, you don't actually engage in the link. You just create an opportunity for your reader to move. Okay, so that's not so earth-shattering, but it's kind of intriguing because you might not have thought that that's what you're doing. You're creating opportunities for others to click on things. When you engage in tagging, in TiddlyWiki world, you add a tag to a tiddler. Again, not earth-shattering, but I want to treat each of these as separate practices and separate behaviors. So listing is new to us, to most people. And I've had trouble generating this as a definition, because what does it mean to actually list? But if you think about your text as having a bunch of objects, and the act of listing is selecting some of them to be made available to your readers for possible navigation to. So what's the smallest list that you can have? How many tiddlers? How many objects? What's the smallest list? You could have a list of 0. Yeah. Maybe. I think so. You have a list. Like sometimes if you list things, there's nothing that meets that criteria, so there's nothing in the set. Okay. Can you have a list of 1? Yeah, there's only one thing. What's the maximum number of objects in your list? So what are the possibilities? Like 10, 100? No, I mean, it's got to be not a real number, but it's a number that's relative to something else. What's the maximum number of objects you can have in a list? Remember, we're designing and writing interactive texts. What's a text? Anybody? Mueller? Hello? What's a text? What's a text? Anybody remember? Think of your TiddlyWiki. What's the maximum number of tiddlers that could be listed? Yeah. Pardon? The number of tiddlers that you have, right? Yeah, it's the maximum number of tiddlers in the wiki. I think if you go to Control Panel and look at Settings, Info, 635. Okay, so there's 635 tiddlers in Design Reg Studio. So it's the number of objects in your text. That's why you have to have a text, because you have to have a maximum. If you think of the World Wide Web as a single text, what's the maximum number of objects that can be in your list? Many large numbers, right? What's the maximum number of queries that Google will return to you? That's a list. There's a number. You don't know it, and it's irrelevant to you most of your life, but there's a number out there. Okay, so that's what listing does. It's manipulating the range of nodes or objects and deciding which ones you're going to make available to your readers to choose among. Okay, but might be none. Those are kind of useless lists to your readers unless they want to know that there's nothing that meets this criteria. Might be 1. Anybody ever play the Google search game where you get 1 and exactly 1 response to your query? That's cool. So you can write a Google query that yields 1 response. That's not easy to do, by the way. But anyway, that's like, we do it in TiddlyWiki all the time, okay? So that's listing. Templating. I gave a definition to template. I'm going to jump to transclusion next, sorry. Transclusion is the one that you have practiced for a long time. You learned transclusion in middle school algebra. If you took algebra in middle school, maybe 8th grade, 9th grade. People remember taking algebra? Where you substitute the value of a variable for a value, right? You put the value in there, that's basically transclusion. It's like let x equals O, x, and you transclude, in effect you transclude. So we transclude tiddlers, we transclude, basically, technically we transclude fields of tiddlers, and the default field of a tiddler to be transcluded is the text field. So if you just ask for a tiddler, you'll get the text field. So that's the default field. If you ask for a specific field, you get the value of that field. Okay. And then finally, templating. Templating is strange in some respects. I like that quote there at the end. It's like applying a mask. So it structures the way that tiddlers are presented. It structures the way that content is presented on the basis of its characteristics, its fields, its values. You can just show me this, don't show me that, and you'll see a lot of templating around it. It's one of the basics of web building. It's basics of game design. Google Docs offers you a default template. Microsoft Word gives you a default template, and most of the time you don't mess with it. But when you do, you become powerful as a designer. And it's the same in TiddlyWiki. You can not mess with templates, or, well, I insist that you do. Okay, so we've got those basic practices, and then what we want to do is focus on how to engage in those practices using specific techniques. So I'm going to run through them kind of quickly, and then we'll run through them in practice. So the practice of writing a link, you enclose a word in double square brackets, and it makes it a link. Okay. The practice of tagging an object, you go, I didn't make a picture of it. You go up into that tag field and you type the name of the tag and you hit add, and that tags the object. Okay. So that's a specific technique of how to do that. Creating transclusions gets a little more complex. We go from square brackets to curly braces. And you can close a tiddler name in double braces, double curly braces, and that will give you the field text. You can enclose a tiddler name followed by double exclamation points in the name of field, and that will give you the contents of that field. So if I were to write, I'm going to go to that tiddler creating transclusions, and we're going to look at the contents of it. There's a field called this field, and the value of this field is a transcluded field. And if we look at number 3 here, this line of code yields this line of output, creating transclusions, bang, bang, this field results in that value. So you can see how you transclude a value and it puts it there, if you will, or displays it or renders it. And I've been using the word render and display somewhat interchangeably. It puts, right now we're only working with pieces of text, but it could just as easily be an image or a video or anything that's in a field. You can put all sorts of different things in fields. We're only working with words, but you were working with shapes, right? In fact, I think I probably have a big square in here, a medium blue square. So yeah, I shouldn't do that, but it never works when you demo stuff live. I don't remember how to do that. So I'm just going to save and pretend that didn't happen. But you could just easily put shapes in there instead of fields. Generating lists is as complex a task as you'll have in class. This is the general format. And I put those brackets in there because that might begin to drive you a little crazy. There's always filter equals, quotes, set of brackets. And then inside those brackets, you write filters. So here's an example. And the idea here is that you should just be able to copy this code and paste it in one of your tiddlers, and then maybe you change this tag. Okay, so this generates a list of tiddlers tagged to techniques for hypertextual writing in TiddlyWiki. And here's a list. Not sure why we're getting bullet points on that. We're getting bullet points because on my, I asked for a bullet point, which is an option 8, and I forgot to put it up here. That's what that would look like. Okay. And then last, for writing a template, and I think you've seen this. You've all built templates in the previous exercise. And what I repeat here is the code that you put across the top, the first line of code, if you want. It can be anywhere, basically. Inside a tiddler, that's going to be a template. And you still have to tag it as a template, so I'll work on that. But basically that asks, is the current tiddler tagged with what's inside the brackets? Okay, so that asks the question, does the current tiddler have these characteristics? If it does, then follow these directions. If it doesn't, it's a list of 0, in effect. And so either does or doesn't, so don't pay attention to it. And so that gives us that technique. Okay, so the idea is that these practices, linking, listing, tagging, templating, transclusion, all hypertextual writers engage in those practices, and their specific techniques in TiddlyWiki. Okay, so that's the second half of our class. I'm trying to move them a little bit more quickly. I watched one of the videos, and I can imagine if you weren't here, it would be really dreadful. It might be dreadful if you're here, so I don't know. But it's just like, wow, it's going too slowly. So I'm going fast. You can watch it again if you'd like.